Princess Nala grew up in the grand palace of the Corvani Empire, where the walls were covered with ancient paintings and old books filled with stories that most people called fairy tales. Her favorite stories as a child were about the legendary Terrans, mysterious beings from a distant world called Earth. The old tales described them as creatures with almost magical powers. They could heal from terrible injuries in days instead of months, survive in places where other beings would die instantly, and fight with such determination that even the strongest warriors feared them. The stories painted humans as small compared to most galactic species, but what they lacked in size they made up for in pure stubborn will. The ancient books spoke of Terrans who could adapt to any environment, from frozen ice worlds to burning desert planets. They could breathe different types of air, eat foods that would poison others, and somehow find ways to survive when everything seemed hopeless. Most amazing of all, the legends claimed that when humans were backed into a corner with no way out, they became even more dangerous, fighting with a fury that terrified their enemies. But Princess Nala, now grown and responsible for her people's safety, had long stopped believing in such impossible tales. After all, no creature in the known galaxy possessed such abilities. The Corvani were strong and intelligent. The Zephyrians could fly through space without ships, and the crystalloids could live for thousands of years. But even they had clear limitations. The idea of beings who could adapt to anything seemed like the kind of story adults told children to make them feel brave. That morning started like any other in the Empire. Princess Nala was reviewing reports in her office when alarms began blaring throughout the palace. Her communication device crackled to life with urgent voices reporting that something had crashed on Xerion, the small rocky moon that orbited their homeworld. The impact had been massive, creating a crater visible even from their planet's surface. Following standard protocol, Princess Nala assembled a rescue team. As the heir to the Empire, she often led such missions to show her people that the royal family shared their dangers. Her team included Dr. Vextar, the Empire's best medical officer, along with several engineers and security personnel. They boarded their fastest ship and flew toward the crash site, expecting to find survivors from some merchant vessel or perhaps refugees fleeing conflict in a distant system. The crash site was worse than they had imagined. The unknown ship had hit the moon's surface at tremendous speed, carving a deep gouge in the rocky ground and scattering debris across several kilometers. The vessel itself was unlike anything in their databases. Its design was ancient and primitive, with thick metal plating and strange symbols carved into its hull. Most of the ship had been destroyed on impact, but one section remained partially intact. Inside the damaged vessel, emergency lighting flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The team moved carefully through twisted corridors filled with broken equipment and strange devices they couldn't identify. The ship's technology seemed both primitive and sophisticated at the same time, as if its builders had taken a completely different approach to space travel than any known civilization. In what appeared to be the ship's emergency section, they discovered something that made everyone stop in their tracks. A single cryogenic pod sat in the center of the room, its surface covered in frost but still humming with power. The readings on its ancient display showed that it had been active for an incredibly long time, over 40 standard cycles, which was longer than most beings could survive in suspended animation. Dr. Vextar ran his medical scanner over the pod and immediately stepped backward in shock. "Princess," he whispered, his voice filled with disbelief, "the life signs I'm reading are impossible. This creature's body has not just survived 4 decades in cryosleep, it's actually improved during the process. The cellular regeneration rates are beyond anything I've ever seen." As they watched, the pod began to open with a soft hissing sound. Mist poured out as the ancient machinery completed its wake-up sequence. Inside lay a being that looked somewhat like them, but was clearly different. He was smaller than any adult Corvani, with pale skin that had an almost translucent quality, and facial features that were both familiar and alien. His hair was dark and straight, and even unconscious. There was something about his expression that suggested intelligence and determination. The being's eyes suddenly opened, and Princess Nala found herself staring into the face of what could only be one of the mythical Terrans. The ancient stories had been true. Humans were real, and one of them had just awakened after sleeping for 40 years among the stars. The moment Jin opened his eyes, everything Dr. Vextar knew about medicine went out the window. In all his years of treating different species across the galaxy, he had never seen anything like what happened during the human's recovery. Normally, when someone wakes up from cryogenic sleep, their body goes through a painful adjustment period that can last weeks or even months. Their muscles are weak, their organs struggle to function properly, and their minds are often confused and slow to respond. But Jin was different. Within the first hour of awakening, his body temperature had somehow regulated itself to match their environment perfectly. Dr. Vextar kept checking his instruments, certain they were malfunctioning, but the readings were consistent. The human's internal systems were adapting faster than should have been possible, as if his body was automatically fine-tuning itself like a sophisticated machine. Princess Nala visited Jin every day during his recovery, partly out of curiosity and partly out of responsibility as the leader of the rescue mission. What she witnessed amazed her more each time. On the second day, Jin was sitting up in bed and asking questions about their technology. By the third day, he was standing and walking around the medical bay, even though his muscles should have been too weak to support his own weight. The most incredible thing was watching Jin breathe. The Corvani atmosphere was quite different from what his species would be used to. It had higher levels of certain gases and lower levels of others. Any other alien would need breathing assistance or special equipment to survive in their environment. But Jin's respiratory system seemed to be learning and adapting in real time. His breathing was initially labored and difficult, but within hours it became easier and more natural, as if his lungs were actually changing themselves to process their air more efficiently. Dr. Vextar ran test after test, trying to understand how this was possible. Jin's blood showed unusual properties. It carried oxygen more efficiently than any known species, and his cellular regeneration was happening at a rate that seemed to defy biological laws. When they took small tissue samples for analysis, the wounds healed within hours instead of days. But perhaps most remarkable was Jin's mind. Despite being unconscious for 4 decades, he showed no signs of mental deterioration or confusion. In fact, his ability to learn and process new information was extraordinary. Princess Nala had expected to spend weeks teaching him their language through basic gestures and simple words. Instead, Jin seemed to absorb their speech patterns almost instantly. On his 4th day awake, Jin spoke his first complete sentence in their language. His accent was strange and musical, unlike anything heard in the known galaxy, but his grammar was nearly perfect. By the end of the week, he was holding complex conversations, asking detailed questions about their society, technology, and history. "Your legends speak of my people?" Jin asked one afternoon, his dark eyes studying Princess Nala's face carefully. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at her. Not threatening, but intensely focused, as if he was analyzing not just her words but her body language, her tone, and the meaning behind everything she said. Princess Nala hesitated before answering. The royal court had been buzzing with rumors about their mysterious guest, and she wasn't sure how much she should reveal. "There are old stories," she said carefully. "Most people consider them fantasy tales, like stories about dragons or magic." Jin's expression changed, becoming more serious and somehow older, as if the weight of centuries was settling on his shoulders. "How long has it been since humans were last seen in this part of the galaxy?" Princess Nala consulted her datapad, pulling up information from the royal archives. "According to our historical records, the last confirmed sighting of your people was over 300 cycles ago. But even then, they were considered extremely rare." The news seemed to hit Jin like a physical blow. For a moment, his composed expression cracked, and Princess Nala saw something heartbreaking in his eyes. The realization that he might be completely alone, the last of his kind in this entire region of space. But almost immediately, she noticed something else replacing the sadness. Jin's eyes became calculating and sharp, his mind clearly working through implications and possibilities at rapid speed. This matched exactly what the ancient texts said about human thinking. The old stories claimed that Terrans had a unique ability to see patterns and connections that other species missed. They could look at a complex situation and immediately start planning multiple steps ahead, considering outcomes and consequences that wouldn't occur to other beings until much later. Then I may be the only one who remembers why we scattered in the first place, Jin said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made Princess Nala's skin crawl with unease. There was something ominous in his tone, suggesting that whatever had driven the humans away from this part of the galaxy had been terrible enough to make them abandon entire star systems. As Jin continued his remarkable recovery, Princess Nala began to realize that finding him might not have been the simple rescue mission she had expected. The mythical Terran sitting in their medical bay carried secrets from the past, and his presence might be about to change everything they thought they knew about their place in the universe. Word spread quickly through the Corvani Empire about the strange being who claimed to be a legendary Terran. Within days, representatives from across the galaxy had arrived to witness this supposed miracle, but not everyone was convinced. The High Council, led by Elder Mordak, demanded absolute proof before they would accept that the ancient myths were real. Elder Mordak was the Empire's most respected scholar, a being who had spent over 2 centuries studying ancient texts and debunking false claims. He had built his reputation on separating fact from fiction, and he wasn't about to let some unknown creature fool the entire galaxy with clever tricks. The Elder believed that Jin was either a member of some undiscovered species trying to gain fame or worse, a spy using advanced technology to fake the legendary human abilities. "We cannot simply accept wild claims based on stories from our childhood," Elder Mordak announced to the assembled council. "If this being truly possesses the abilities described in the ancient texts, then he should be able to prove it through scientific testing. I have designed a series of trials that will either confirm or deny his supposed heritage once and for all." Princess Nala felt uncomfortable with the idea of subjecting Jin to dangerous experiments, but she understood the council's position. If Jin really was human, then his presence would change everything they thought they knew about the galaxy. But if he was lying, they needed to expose the deception before it caused panic or false hope among their people. The first test took place in the Empire's most advanced laboratory. Elder Mordak had prepared a sealed chamber filled with the atmosphere used in Corvani industrial facilities, a mixture of gases so toxic that even brief exposure would kill most carbon-based life forms. The chamber was used for manufacturing processes that required environments completely hostile to living beings. No organic creature can survive in this atmosphere for more than a few minutes, Elder Mordak explained to the gathered observers. If this being is truly what he claims to be, he should be able to endure what would kill any other known species. Jin entered the chamber calmly, showing no signs of fear or hesitation. As the toxic atmosphere filled the space around him, the observers watched in amazement as he continued breathing normally. Not only did he survive, but he remained completely conscious and alert, even conducting a normal conversation through the communication system. After an hour in the deadly environment, Jin emerged looking no different than when he had entered. The second test was even more extreme. Elder Mordak subjected Jin to temperature conditions that would flash freeze. Most beings in seconds, followed immediately by heat intense enough to incinerate organic matter. The temperature chamber cycled between these extremes rapidly, creating conditions that should have torn apart any living creature at the cellular level. But something extraordinary happened as they watched Jin through the observation window. His body seemed to be adapting in real time to each temperature change. When the chamber became freezing cold, his skin took on a slightly different color and texture, as if his blood flow and metabolism were automatically adjusting. When the heat became intense, his body somehow regulated itself to prevent damage, like a biological air conditioning system that worked perfectly every time. Dr. Vextar, who was monitoring Jin's vital signs throughout the test, kept shaking, his head in disbelief. "His cellular structure is literally changing to accommodate each new environment," he whispered to Princess Nala. "It's as if his body contains some kind of built-in survival system that activates automatically when faced with hostile conditions." But the final test was what truly shattered everyone's understanding of what was possible. Elder Mordak presented Jin with the famous Mordak paradox, a logical puzzle that had stumped the greatest minds in the galaxy for over 200 years. The problem involved a complex mathematical and philosophical challenge that seemed to have no solution due to inherent contradictions in its structure. Scholars from dozens of species had spent their entire careers trying to solve the paradox. Advanced computer systems had run calculations for decades without finding an answer. The puzzle had become legendary in academic circles, representing the kind of problem that was theoretically solvable, but practically impossible due to the limitations of conventional thinking. Jin sat quietly for less than an hour, occasionally asking for clarification on certain terms or concepts. The assembled scholars watched nervously, expecting him to eventually admit defeat like so many others before him. Instead, Jin calmly presented a solution that was so simple and elegant that it left everyone speechless. Elder Mordak's first reaction was anger and suspicion. "Impossible," he shouted. "You must have accessed our databases somehow, or received help from hidden technology. No one solves the Mordak paradox in under an hour." Jin looked at the elder with patience and understanding. "I didn't actually solve your puzzle," he explained calmly. "I realized that the entire problem was based on false assumptions. You were all trying to find an answer within a framework that made the solution impossible. Instead of accepting those limitations, I ignored the false premises and found a third option that none of you had considered." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Jin hadn't just solved an impossible puzzle, he had demonstrated a completely different way of thinking. While other species had been trapped by the logical constraints built into the problem, the human had simply stepped outside those constraints and found a path that no one else had seen. Princess Nala looked around at the stunned faces of the council members and realized that the ancient myths hadn't even come close to capturing the full truth. Humans didn't just survive impossible situations through physical toughness. They redefined the very concept of what was possible by thinking in ways that other species couldn't imagine. Jin hadn't just passed their tests. He had shown them that their understanding of reality itself was far too limited. Something terrible began happening within hours of Jin passing the High Council's tests. Deep in space, ancient monitoring stations that had been silent for centuries suddenly came to life. These automated systems, floating in the dark void between star systems, had been waiting patiently for a very specific signal. When Jin's unique, human biosignature was detected and analyzed by the Corvani medical equipment, that information was automatically transmitted across their communication networks as part of standard scientific data sharing. The ancient machines recognized something in that data stream, something they had been programmed to watch for hundreds of years ago. Immediately, they began broadcasting activation codes across the galaxy using frequencies so old that most civilizations had forgotten they existed. These signals traveled faster than light, reaching destinations in the deepest, darkest corners of space where massive forms had been waiting in perfect stillness. Princess Nala was in her private chambers when the first emergency alerts began flooding in from their outer monitoring stations. The reports seemed impossible. Their long-range sensors were detecting movement from objects that were enormous beyond imagination. These weren't asteroids or natural phenomena, but artificial structures moving with clear purpose and direction. When she rushed to the command center. She found Jin already there, his face pale as he studied the incoming data. The sensor readings showed massive geometric shapes emerging from areas of space that had appeared empty for as long as anyone could remember. These objects were moving in perfect formation, traveling at speeds that suggested technology far beyond anything in the known galaxy. "What are those things?" Princess Nala asked, staring at the display screens that showed dozens of enormous vessels converging on their location from multiple directions. Jin's expression was grim as he continued analyzing the sensor data. "They're called devourers," he said quietly, "and they're real just like the old stories said." Princess Nala felt her entire understanding of reality beginning to crumble. First, humans had turned out to be real instead of mythological. Now, Jin was telling her that another legend from the ancient texts was also true. "That's impossible," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "The Devourers are just stories, tales meant to frighten children about monsters in the dark." "Like humans were just stories?" Jin asked, turning to face her with eyes that held terrible knowledge. "The Devourers were the reason my people scattered across the galaxy in the first place. Everything you think you know about human history is wrong." As more reports came in from their outer sensor networks, the scale of what was approaching became clear. The Devourer fleet consisted of ships that were each the size of small moons, their surfaces covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. These weren't vessels designed for exploration or trade. They were instruments of pure destruction, built by a machine intelligence that viewed organic life as something to be eliminated. Jin explained the truth that had been hidden for centuries. Long ago, humans had encountered the Devourers during their early expansion into space. The machine race had been systematically destroying organic civilizations across multiple galaxies, consuming entire worlds, and turning their resources into more ships for their endless fleet. "We didn't lose the war against them," Jin said, his voice heavy with the weight of history. "We fought them to a standstill, but at a terrible cost. Every battle revealed our locations to them, and they would send more ships to those coordinates. We realized that as long as we kept fighting in inhabited areas, we were putting other species at risk. The human strategy had been both brilliant and heartbreaking. Instead of continuing to fight the Devourers directly, they had chosen to scatter themselves across the galaxy, going into hiding and avoiding contact with other civilizations. The Devourers had been programmed to hunt humans specifically, so by disappearing, humanity had effectively caused the machine fleet to go into dormant mode, waiting for their prey to resurface. For 300 years, they've been sleeping in the dark spaces between stars," Jin continued. "But when your medical equipment scanned me and transmitted that data across your networks, it triggered their awakening protocols. They know there's a human here now, and they're coming to finish what they started." Princess Nala stared at the tactical display showing the approaching fleet. There were hundreds of Devourer ships, each one large enough to destroy entire planets. Her people's most advanced warships looked like toys in comparison. "How many humans did it take to fight them before?" she asked. "Billions," Jin replied, grimly. "And even then, we could only manage a stalemate. My people sacrificed themselves to keep these machines dormant, and now my presence has undone centuries of protection." The weight of responsibility was crushing. Jin had awakened from his long sleep to discover that he might have doomed the entire galaxy by simply existing. But as Princess Nala watched him study the tactical data, she saw something else in his expression. The same calculating look she had noticed before, as if he was already forming a plan. "Your people need to begin evacuating the core worlds immediately," Jin said, his voice taking on the tone of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. "Start with the most populated systems and work outward. You have maybe days before they arrive." "What about you?" Princess Nala asked. Jin was quiet, for a long moment, still staring at the approaching fleet. "First, I need to send a message," he said finally. "If there are any other humans left in this part of the galaxy, they need to know what's coming. And if we're going to have any chance of stopping this, we'll need every advantage we can get." Alarms began sounding throughout the Empire and evacuation orders went out to billions of citizens. Princess Nala realized that Jin's awakening had changed everything. The galaxy was about to face its greatest threat, and their only hope lay with the mythical species that had already sacrificed everything once to keep them safe. Jin worked frantically at the communications array in the Corvani command center, his fingers dancing across controls that were completely alien to him, yet somehow he seemed to understand their function instinctively, adapting the equipment to broadcast on frequencies that hadn't been used in centuries. Princess Nala watched in amazement as he bypassed their normal communication protocols and tapped into something much older and more primitive. "What kind of message are you sending?" she asked, noting the strange mathematical patterns appearing on the transmission display. Jin paused for a moment, his hands still working on the controls. something that every human in this part of the galaxy will recognize no matter how long they've been away from home. His voice carried a mixture of hope and desperation. If there are any of my people left out there, they'll understand what this means. The transmission that went out was surprisingly simple for something that might determine the fate of the galaxy. In the ancient human language of Earth, Jin broadcast just 3 words, repeated over and over again on multiple frequency bands. Come home now. The message wasn't complex or technical. It was the kind of call that would reach straight to the heart of anyone who remembered what it meant to be human. Princess Nala had expected to wait days or even weeks for any response. The galaxy was enormous, and even if humans were still out there, they could be scattered across thousands of light years. But what happened next defied all her expectations about space travel and communication. Within hours, their sensors began detecting new contacts approaching from seemingly empty regions of space. These weren't coming from known trade routes or inhabited systems, but from the dark areas between stars where no civilization was supposed to exist. The first ship to decloak was unlike anything in Princess Nala's experience. It didn't match the design philosophy of any known species. The vessel commanded by Sujin looked more like a living thing than a machine. Its hull seemed to breathe and pulse with organic rhythms, and sections of it appeared to be growing rather than manufactured. When Princess Nala asked Jin about it, he smiled sadly and explained that some humans had learned to live in partnership with spaceborne organisms, creating ships that were part technology and part ecosystem. Sujin's people found a way to survive in the void by becoming part of it, he said. Their ships can reproduce, heal themselves, and adapt to any environment. They've been traveling between stars for generations, never staying in one place long enough to be detected. The second ship to arrive was scarred and battle-worn, its hull marked with burns and impacts from weapons that Princess Nala didn't recognize. Teho's vessel looked like it had been through countless fights with enemies that existed only in nightmares. The ship's armor was pieced together from different materials, some of which seemed to be technology from unknown civilizations. Teho's fleet has been fighting things in the galactic rim that most species don't even know exist, Jin explained. They've spent centuries battling horrors that lurk in the spaces between realities, keeping threats away from inhabited worlds. They've seen things that would drive other beings insane, but it was Minna's ship that truly shocked Princess Nala. The vessel appeared to be part machine itself, with sections that moved and reconfigured constantly. Looking at it directly caused a strange sensation, as if her eyes couldn't quite focus on its true shape. The ship seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially somewhere else entirely. Some humans learn to adapt by becoming one with their technology, Jin said, noticing her discomfort. Minna's people have merged with their ships in ways that blur the line between organic and artificial intelligence. They can process information and react to threats faster than any purely biological being. As more ships arrived from the darkness, Princess Nala began to understand the true scope of what she was witnessing. These weren't just survivors who had been hiding in space. They were the descendants of an entire civilization that had deliberately scattered itself across the galaxy to protect others. Each group had adapted to their environment in different ways, becoming specialized for survival in the harshest conditions imaginable. The human fleet that assembled was unlike anything that had ever been seen in recorded galactic history. There were ships that looked like crystalline structures, vessels that seemed to be made of pure energy, and craft that appeared to phase in and out of existence. Each one represented a different branch of humanity that had found its own unique way to survive in exile. We kept the old promises, Jin told Princess Nala, as the Devourer fleet entered the outer edge of their solar system. We stayed hidden from other civilizations to keep them safe. We scattered ourselves so widely that no enemy could find us all. But we also stayed ready, knowing that someday we might be needed again. The first engagement between the human fleet and the lead Devourer vessel happened so quickly that Princess Nala almost missed it. One moment the massive machine ship was approaching at steady speed, and the next, it was surrounded by human vessels that seemed to appear from nowhere. The battle was unlike anything she had ever seen. The humans didn't fight like any known military doctrine. but used tactics that seemed to bend the rules of space combat itself. Su Jin's organic ship flowed around the Devourer like liquid, avoiding its weapons while attacking from impossible angles. Taeho's scarred vessel absorbed direct hits that should have destroyed it, then responded with weapons that tore through the machine's armor like paper. Minna's craft seemed to attack from multiple dimensions simultaneously, striking the enemy from directions that shouldn't have existed. As Princess Nala watched her mythical Terrans prove that some legends exist because the truth was too extraordinary for ordinary minds to accept, she realized that humanity's return to galactic civilization wasn't just about fighting the Devourers. It was about showing the galaxy what was possible when a species refused to accept limitations, when they adapted and evolved and never gave up hope, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. The battle for the galaxy had begun, and humanity had come home.